Welcome to the Women at the Top podcast interview series. My name is Regina Barr, and I'm the founder of the Women at the Top Network, and I'll be your host today. For those of you who don't know us, we are a community of like-minded women who share the Watt vision and mission. And our goal, simply put, is to empower aspiring women to lead. And we do this by providing training, information, and connections. And I'm so excited to tell you that joining me today is Dr. Lois Frankel, author of Nice Girls Don't Speak Up or Stand Out. But before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Frankel. The name Dr. Lois Frankel has become practically synonymous with empowering women in the workplace. She is the author of the best-selling business Bible for women, Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office, and other books in the Nice Girls series, including Nice Girls Don't Get Rich, Nice Girls Just Don't Get It, and her most recent audiobook, Nice Girls Don't Speak Up or Stand Out. Dr. Frankel is a pioneer in the field of executive coaching and an internationally sought-after keynote speaker. Her client list is a who's who of major firms and includes Amgen, Arco, Goldman Sachs, Lockheed Martin, McKinsey & Co., Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, ConocoPhillips, Nestle, and the Walt Disney Company. Her earned doctorate is from the University of Southern California, and she also holds an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from Phillips Graduate Institute for her recognized philanthropic work with women and girls. So on that note, welcome to our podcast today, Dr. Frankel.
Regina, thank you so much for having me.
You know, I was telling you before we jumped on here today that I was very excited. You and I feel like have a long positive history of working together in another organization that I was part of. And so I am just so excited to have you here with us again today.
It's my pleasure.
So I mentioned that you've written numerous books in the Nice Girl series, and I'm always interested in hearing the backstory of your latest book. So what made you write Nice Girls Don't Speak Up or Stand Out, and why did you choose to make it an audio release?
Yeah, you know, the reason why I wrote it was because at the end of my keynotes, when people would come up and give me feedback, the things they liked best had to do with communication. And I think it's because that's tangible, right? So I thought, well, why don't I take all my tips just about communication and put them in one place? And so when I pitched it to my publisher, they said, okay, great, we had a deal. And I started writing it. And as I was writing it, I was thinking, you know what, this is going to be flat if you read it. You really need to hear me say these things. I think it's one reason why at the end of keynotes, people said they liked it. You know, that was what they liked because they could hear it. So I went back to the publisher and I said, you know what, can we make this an audio book? I don't think it's going to work as a written book. And they said, sure. So that's how that came about.
That is so interesting. And I have to tell you, having done some of your training, I've read all of your books. I will tell you that some of the tangible pieces I remember are the pieces about the communication, because I think communication is so critical to getting not only what we want, but also what we need to be successful in the workplace. So I think that piece really resonates with women, and I think is an important part of what your message is.
Thank you. You know, I feel the same way, that if you can communicate with courage and confidence, some of the other things will come naturally.
Agree. So courage and confidence for those that are listening in with us. So you originally had a different working title for the book. So tell us more about that. What was it and what made you change it?
Yeah, I did. Well, the publisher made me change it, but which they always do. I always come up with these titles and then they always go, no, let's go back to the Nice Girls series. You know, like Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office was not my title. They changed it to that. And
Okay.
against my strenuous objections, but they were right in the end. But anyway, my working title for this book was How to Tell People to Go to Hell So They Look Forward to the Trip. And that's kind of a paraphrase of a Winston Churchill saying. And I wanted it to be that because that's a woman's challenge. A woman can't say things the same way men can, even in this day and age. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to find ways to say things in a more palatable way. And once we get that, we can say anything we want. It's just about knowing how to do it.
It's interesting that you said that even in this day and age, I still believe, and I believe that you do as well, that there's a bandwidth of behavior for women. And sometimes that frustrates some women. And I tell them, look, I don't make the rules. I just really want to play the game. So if you have a problem with that and you're not willing to modify, you're going to have a problem all the way along. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I've had to say that many times, that I don't make the rules, I just report them. And you
Mhm.
can choose to follow some of my coaching tips or not. It's entirely up to you. I'm not trying to make you somebody who's different. But the fact is that every single workplace is a playing field, and it has rules, boundaries, and strategies. And you have to follow those rules, boundaries, or strategies, or you can't win the game. And for women, they're different than for men, but they're also different for people of color. They're different for older people. They're different for differently abled people. And so it's not just women. And more recently, I've come to realize, there's also an onus on men to behave certain ways, and men don't always want to behave that way either. But if they want to be successful, they have to.
That's a good point, and I'm glad that you're pointing that out because I think when we go into the workplace, like you said, if we want to be successful, there are rules. It's the same reason that a lot of us, when we go to work, we don't wear sweatpants. We wear a suit or something like a uniform, if you will. I
Mhm.
view if you're wearing a suit or something more as a uniform as well. So
Yes, exactly.
so your book talks about how women need to find their voice. And I will tell you, this is something that resonates with me and that I can relate to for a lot of personal reasons, growing up, et cetera. So, I would tell you on paper, it does sound simple, right? But I really don't think it is that simple. So tell us some of the ways in which women don't speak up or they don't stand out.
Yeah, and I see this happen in all ages and stages of life, because I just saw a friend of mine do something the other day. It was acquiesce to her husband in a way that I know she would never acquiesce to a client. And so when we think about some ways in which women don't speak up or stand out, sometimes it's about disagreeing. It's about stating what you really want. It's about negotiating. It's about having difficult conversations with people. These are all ways that women, still have difficulty in communicating. And a lot of it stems from this need to be liked, right? It's the nice girl syndrome, that I want to be liked and I don't want to be called a bitch. And so I limit my behaviors to those that fall into a very narrow playing field. And, although the workplace is a playing field, I often say, if you play too narrow, you can't win the game. If you're off the field, you can't win the game either. So for women, they really need to understand, how do they address these things? And I know later we're going to be talking about procreating and mansplaining. Those are other things that women tolerate. And so, it's not only errors of commission, it's errors of omission as well.
Yeah, you make a lot of really great points. And uh, we'll have some interesting dialogue when we get to some of those other challenges and issues that I think have always been there, but we're naming them. And I think that's half the battle is naming them. So
Yeah, and
now,
excuse me, and I think
yeah.
that's what I hear most often when I get emails from people who have read my books from around the world. It's, oh, now I see I'm not the only one, and I
Mhm.
see exactly what I'm doing wrong. And that's really why I write the books, is so that people can see some of the foolish things they do because they are women, right? And how
Mhm.
you can turn that around.
Yeah, and I think that's what's key. And I think what's important for those watching or listening, that these are things you can turn around. And that really leads me to my next question for you. So, your audio book begins with what you call toolkit basics. So, tell us a little bit about those basics. And then, how do you combine them to be a clearer, more confident communicator?
Yeah, the basics, and I always say it's like having certain like I'm a bread baker. And so there's certain basics I always have in my cupboard, right? And then if I want to do something special, I can go out and I can get the other ingredients. Well, these are some of the essential ingredients that you need in your communication toolkit. The first one is to be constantly building strong relationships. As you said at the beginning of this webinar, you said, you know what? We've known each other a long time. That's the relationship. That's what relationships do for you. You get to call in chips. There's reciprocity. There's all kinds of wonderful things that relationships are really, I call them the WD-40 of communication. Because if you don't have a relationship in place, it's already too late to build it. When you do have a relationship in place, people are likely to cut you slack, and you're likely to cut other people slack. And so you need to be constantly building relationships. That's number one. Number two, you need to talk back to the voice in your head. That has to be in your toolkit too. That ability to, when that voice comes up that says, who are you to think you should have this? Or, you're not qualified for this, or, whatever voice comes up that holds you back, you need to have a mantra that talks back to that. When I say a mantra, it's just a sentence. And the sentence could be as simple as, who am I to think it? I'm smart, I'm well educated, and I have a lot of experience. That's who I am, until you start to believe it. Some more tangible things are to use a desk script, DESC. And I explain that in the book. A desk script is how you have a difficult conversation without demolishing the other person or without feeling kind of smarmy about it all. And so I have a model for desk scripting. It's DESC. Describe why you want to talk to the person, explain how you see the situation, elicit their viewpoint, specify what you want, and create consequences, either positive or negative. So that, having that script in your head, excuse me, when you're going to have a difficult conversation is very helpful. Another thing that you need in your toolkit basics is headline communication. And probably of everything I ever teach, headline communication is the thing people like best. Because what I say is, if you want people to hear you, you have to remember that short sounds confident. The more words you use, you soften your message. The fewer words you use, you strengthen your message. So the headline communication model says the first thing out of your mouth has to be the most important. And then you provide 2 or 3 pieces of supporting information and you stop. Or you may use a tagline. And a tagline men don't have to use, but women do have to use. And a tagline tosses it back to the other person. So it might sound like this. It might sound like, Regina, I've looked at your diversity and inclusivity program, and I think you're doing great things. I also think there's 3 additional things that you might be able to do. And then I list those 3 things. And I say, what do you think about that? Is there any reason why you couldn't implement those? And it's as simple as that. If I was a consultant to you, or even if I was an internal consultant, women have to see that you may be internal consultants. Using that model really helps to get your message across more clearly and cleanly. And so those are just a few of the basics I think women need in their toolkit.
So I love that you mentioned your headline communications too, because that is for sure something that I did learn from, I believe it was the very first program that I had participated in with you, which was Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. So see, it's working. It's sticking with us.
Yeah, people love that particular model, and for a good reason, because it's totally implementable. Once you get it in your head, you do it all the time. I mean, I've done it several times unconsciously in this interview. When you ask me a question, I usually give my headline and then a little bit of information, then I stop.
The way I always refer it is people, I think, like things that are practical and tactical, right? Because everybody is so busy, they need things that they can implement right away. And I think that's one of those things. So I'm hoping that people are taking lots of things away from our time together today. But if nothing else, that's definitely one that should be at the top of the list for them. So you had alluded to this earlier, And I do wish we didn't have to bring up this next part, but in the book, you do talk about handling things like mansplaining, appropriating, and manterrupting. And I have to tell you, ironically, probably within the last month, I've experienced some of this myself. And it always mind boggles me that we're still, after all these years, having to deal with some of these behaviors. So, for those who may not be familiar with those terms, tell us what these behaviors are and what's the best way to respond to them.
Okay, let's start with mansplaining. Mansplaining is when a man explains something to you that you already know, that you may even be an expert in that area, right? Um, and so, and it can be with you, or it can be that they interrupt you and explain something to somebody else. Okay, so it could be you're in a meeting and you're asked a question and the man answers the question for you. That would be another example of mansplaining. So we'll start with the first one. And the first one is when somebody mansplains to me, I let them finish, and then I very politely say, you probably don't realize that I've spent my entire career in human resources, that I've had my own human resources consulting firm for over 30 years, and that my PhD is in psychology. So these are things that I really have a strong grasp on, and you probably didn't realize that. Now, that's how you tell somebody to go to hell so they look forward to the trip, right? I don't tell,
Yes.
I don't say something like, you don't need to tell me that. I already know that. I very politely let them know who I am. And so women can do that. When it comes to when they interrupt you, in order to answer a question that you've been asked. And it's important that you not let that happen, because let's just say you're at a client meeting and your colleague, you're asked the question and your colleague answers it. It makes it look like you either have nothing to say or you're junior to him or whatever. And so you need to be able to say, excuse me, I've got the answer to this. Let me finish, and then we'll go ahead and turn it over to you and see if you have anything to ask. Anything to add to it. And so it's just that simple. Don't let somebody do that. In basketball, there was a woman on one of my webinars, and she said, it's called a hip check. And I said, what's a hip check? And she said, I played basketball in college. A hip check is when another player gets too close to you and you kind of put your hip out and just nudge them to let them know, I see you there. So it's like a verbal hip check. That's a way to look at it.
Love it.
Man-interrupting, I've kind of already alluded to that, but, men interrupt women far more than women interrupt men. They've done studies at the Supreme Court level, and we see that women Supreme Court justices are interrupted more than male Supreme Court justices. So 2 things here. Number 1, it kind of depends on who interrupts you. If your boss interrupts you, are you going to say, hold on, let me finish? Maybe if you have a good relationship and your boss is that kind of person. But if your boss interrupts you, or somebody very senior, let's say it's your boss's boss, you may let them finish what they have to say. And then what you say is, thank you for saying that. I appreciate you adding to my thoughts. Let me finish my thought now. And let's see if we can put all the ideas together. What you don't do is, in any case, is let your ideas go unspoken. Okay, so it could be your boss interrupts you and you let them finish. If somebody else interrupts you, you may just very nicely say, excuse me, I wasn't quite finished. Let me finish and then I'll toss it back to you. Okay, those are 2 ways that you can handle that, right? And then the third one, it just went out of my head. Mansplaining.
Appropriating.
Appropriating, thank you. You think I would know this by heart, right? Appropriating. Appropriating is when, and this happens to women all the time, when you say something and the idea gets taken over by a man as his idea. That's called appropriating. There's 2 ways to handle this. Number 1, you need to make a deal with everybody in your office that you are going to amplify what women say. Amplification is the process by which, after a woman says something, the other women in the room comment on it. And it can be as simple as saying, I agree with Regina. It could be, Lois, I'd like to add something to that. Or Lois, that's a great idea. I don't see why we can't do that. But the other women in the room need to amplify the idea, because nobody can steal your idea if it's been amplified. If that doesn't happen, short of that happening, if you put out an idea and another guy says it, the exact same idea, what you can do is say, and you have to practice this one because you could say it with a smile, and you can say something like, you know, Joe, thank you so much for expanding on my idea. It makes me realize there are a couple things I'd like to add to it. And basically, again, nice way to say, tell somebody to go to hell so they look forward to the trip. So those are just three behaviors that we need to, that we find happening to ourselves all the time, and some ways you can handle those.
Well, and it allows, I like how you phrased it, because it allows you, A, to be gracious about it, and two, what you had mentioned earlier, to preserve those relationships that you
Yeah.
may need or want to preserve. Like you had said, we don't always want to cut people off at the knees, maybe occasionally, but for the most part, we do want to try to preserve those relationships, because it will just be better for us, I think, in the end.
Oh, yeah. I've talked about it so often that it doesn't cost me anything to be gracious. It doesn't cost me anything to say, hey, Joe, thank you for expanding on my idea, when I really want to say, you just stole my idea. And, I said the exact same thing. But it doesn't cost me anything. And you're right. It maintains strong relationships. And that is critical to workplace success, are those relationships. Don't undermine them.
Agree. So we've been talking about encouraging women to speak up and stand out. What happens when a woman is told by her boss that she speaks up and stands out too much? How should a woman respond to that?
Yeah, what often happens is a woman goes in the other direction. She stops talking, right? If your boss says, you know what, you speak up and stand out too much, you're taking up all the air in the room, she goes in the other direction. That's not the thing to do. The thing to do when you get that feedback is to, and you need to put this phrase in your repertoire as well, is say, tell me more. Tell me how I do it. Do you see me doing it at certain times? Is there specific things that I'm doing that I should be watching out for? I'd like to learn more about how I do this, when I do this, so that I can understand why I do this and correct the behavior. So what you need to do is first get a little bit more information, because it may be that you're not speaking up and standing out too much. It may be that you're just either doing it at the wrong time, or you're doing it in a way that the boss doesn't like. And so you need to just modify that behavior with the boss. You just need more data to help you understand, what am I doing? And it could be that you're doing it too much. There are women who do say to me, I know I come across really strong. And I say, well, okay, then if you're at the other end of the continuum, then you need to understand, how do you bring it to the middle? Because if, I have a saying in coaching, if three people say you're drunk, lie down. So if you get that feedback frequently, you need to do something about it, or else you'll put yourself outside the playing field and you'll lose the game. So just get more information, see where it's coming from, how often it happens, if it's consistent feedback or just this one person. And so once you have that data, you can modify your behavior accordingly. Or it may be, I had one woman, I'm just thinking about this. I had one woman who I gave that feedback to, that I thought she wasn't speaking up enough. And she said, in my culture, if women speak up, they get slammed down.
Mm,
Okay, I can understand that. I don't want you to do anything that's going to get you in trouble in your culture, but you maybe want to think about being in a culture where you can really shine, rather than have to be the tall poppy that gets cut down.
exactly. How sad is that?
Mm.
So, your book, you have lots of techniques in your book, that our listeners can check out in the book. Is there one that's more difficult for you than the others?
Oh, yeah. I always have difficulty. In one of the things that is hardest for me is networking.
Mm,
And I know it probably surprises you, Regina, because you could put me
mhm.
in a room of people and I can maneuver nicely. Um, but it takes every bit of energy that I have because I'm an extreme introvert. I mean, you don't write all these books and not be an introvert, to be quite honest, because it takes that kind of behavior. So for me, it's about networking and building those relationships in that way that I just never felt comfortable with it. And I think, to be quite honest, I've probably missed out on opportunities because I didn't have the relationship in place when I needed it. But it was a price I was willing to pay because it just made me too uncomfortable. And that's something else that we need to think about is, you don't want to turn yourself into a pretzel just to be the person you think is required to achieve your goals. As I just said, there's a price I'm willing to pay to not network so much. And if I miss out on some opportunities, okay. But what I try to do is more of what, you've seen me do over the years is build one-on-one relationships. And if I can do that and do that really well, then I achieve my goals.
Well, I'm glad you said that because so many of us do look up to you and you are an expert in this area. And so I think it's really helpful for women to hear that you don't have to do everything, but pick and choose the things that are going to give you the biggest bang for the buck and replenish that energy. Because if all you were doing is going out there and networking, depleting your energy, you probably never would have gotten all these books written and you wouldn't
Never.
have touched as many people as you have. So
Thank you.
I appreciate that you said that.
Thank you.
So it's hard to believe, but we are actually winding down on time, Dr. Frankel. But before you go, if you could offer only one piece of advice to those listening in or watching today, what would that be?
It would be to remember that no one is going to take better care of you than you will take care of yourself. Your boss won't take better care of you than you can take care of yourself by looking for the opportunities that you want and asking for them and negotiating for them. Your spouse or partner will not take better care of you financially than you will take care of yourself. So make sure that you are involved in family finances and planning so that you're not left out in the cold. Your family of origin won't take better care of you than you will take care of yourself. Obviously, continue to be engaged with them, but don't let them dictate who you should be or who they want you to be.
I think that's fabulous advice to take care of yourself because, as you know, so many women put themselves second, or worse, they put themselves last, or they never even put themselves on the list. So I think that's fabulous advice. And I want to say thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Frankel. That does conclude our interview with Dr. Lois Frankel. And just a reminder, you can learn more about Dr. Lois Frankel at www.drloisfrankel, and I'll spell that .com. So DRLOISFRANKEL.com. So thank you again for being here, Dr. Frankel. And for those of
Thank
you
you.
who would like to learn more about our other events, please visit reginabarr.com for upcoming podcasts and other events that we have periodically. So on that note, thank you all for being here with us today and have a wonderful day.